I'm super excited to have Reed back. Reed's been a great supporter of what we do at Hackfort and has some awesome things to say about what he's done in his career and current job and the ever-changing world, right? I think it changes every day in the security and technology field. But anyways, I have a microphone as well. We're going to have a volunteer at the end. So if there is a Q&A, we'll want to make sure to pass this around because this is getting recorded. So yeah. Well, thank you guys for showing up, and thank you, Reed. Have some fun. I hope you guys are enjoying Treefort.
I love Treefort. We're getting such great weather. It's so much fun. Hope you guys are having a great time. My name is Reed Tokars. I am a solution consultant for Cisco, also sometimes called business development manager, I guess. For a lot of years, I managed our offensive security practice in the Americas, sort of a little different job now, but pretty similar. Before that, I was a management consultant. I was an employee for the government doing unscrupulous things. And then after I swore all that off, I became a consultant again at a little offensive security startup in Chicago. So kind of an odd background, but I think the first confession I need to make is my technical chops are not going to impress many people here right now in this building. But the reason my career has really been about tech and I think settled around security very much is the people aspect of it really fascinates me. And particularly with security and offensive security, the scale and impact that you can have when a talented team comes together, or even better yet, multiple talented teams that are just doing really bonkers things in different directions. The result is amazing. And it's really rewarding, and it's most importantly, I think, just fun. So that's kind of where I've focused a lot of my effort, and whenever I'm not billing, that's what I'm doing. I should note on the flip side of all that fun and interestingness, behind the curtain, there's a lot of effort and it takes quite a lot to get an exceptionally specialized group of folks in terms of their labor, their economics, their politics, the job market, et cetera. It can be really hard to organize things and make it cohesive. Maybe I'm weird. I kind of embrace the psychological warfare aspect of running a team of offensive security professionals. I thought it was a lot of fun. And internally in Cisco. But pen testing is an art and a science. You know, it's respecting and managing that. You know, it's respecting and managing the crux of that. I think that I really wanted to get into today. So I was going to share some experiences, some tools, some things we've learned in the spirit of trying to figure out how we can design and support technical teams that get the absolute most out of each person on them. So that's the goal. So what makes managing offensive security teams so hard? You guys know this. Same thing that makes them interesting. You know, the gravity of the projects. Sorry, speaking the mic a bit more. And the spectrum of skill sets that you're dealing with. So when I would explain to recruits or potential new hires that our value chain, you know, from the work being done, you know, frontline to back end reported up through the leadership of our customer, on this whole spectrum of skill sets, I'm probably like around here. But the most valuable, in terms of paid the most, I guess, you know, person on our team that just world-class hacking chops, you know, polished professional speaker, you know, military intelligence credits on their resume, they're still maybe a third to half of that spectrum. So there is no way around the fact that nobody has a perfect purview of your value chain or your project. So when you run into problems, which you always do, particularly operational ones, it's really hard to identify what the problem actually is. You know, when no one can say, or when someone with a strategic purview says, oh, our processes are wrong, or our incentives are wrong. You know, and there's nobody that can overlap both ends of that spectrum, and you've got a technical person saying, what's the technical problem? And they're both saying, well, you're looking at a nail and you're just a hammer, so, you know, it becomes intractable really quick. So when you come to that, you know, situation of how do you start, who leads, you know, how do you prioritize objectives, you know, I think particularly in offensive security or security in general, you know, a lot of us have been in situations where you feel like even with great people or great tools, why are business operations feeling so onerous? Or our customers are successful. You know, it's a world-class organization. Why is it killing me to work with them every day? Or, you know, presented with a situation, maybe you do kind of understand what the problem is, but you're not sure whether or not you want to kind of discount the issue and let time happen, or risk over-rotating to fix them. So first, I'm going to talk a bit about our experience being a startup in Cisco land after we got bought, and then talk about a customer. You know, after I decided no more management consulting firms and no more working for the government, and felt like I had made a great life decision for my health and general welfare, joined a startup, had a lot of fun in Chicago, and lo and behold, we got bought by Cisco pretty quick, which I guess is good, but it turned out I'm still there, so it must have been good. It was a long time ago. So we were the first consulting company Cisco ever acquired. So for a while, we were walking around, you know, all the fancy new buildings, like, you know, we're the next big thing, you know, all of this. Cisco's making a big pivot towards services. And then we started to have to work with all of these silos, and we're like, what do we get ourselves into? You know, because some of the older consultants on our team, they looked at all of the younger ones like and said, you guys are crazy for staying. You're going to be miserable. And they just left straight away. Some are right, some are wrong. I don't know. But we went from a very flat, nimble organization to one that operated in an environment like this, where, you know, everything operated around customers, which is good, but sales ruled the roost, like full stop. Like, and anyone had a problem with that, you had a problem. Engineering and product development was a close second behind. But then our army of engineers, both in the US and abroad, was predominantly focused on installing stuff and fixing stuff. And what this, well, and overlay some cynicism on here. When you have a structure like that, anyone want to guess what is in red up here?
Is it what?
What these titles in red are up here? They're the incentives for these little castles. So when you've got how much stuff can I sell, how much stuff can I install, how fast can I install it, how efficiently can I make stuff that I'm tasked with making, just put my head down and do it, and then an army of pawns of, you know, how can I be seen and work my way up in the bureaucracy. It's not the most conducive environment to collaboration, particularly with the skill sets I mentioned before. And what we ran into on account teams were like a queen, a bishop, and a knight turning our accounts into like little Venezuelas, where there was a dictator, some scarce resource, and a handful of little field generals running around doing things however they wanted to do with impunity. So when Cisco bought us, we were like I said, on the front wave of a big ship turning, you know, a pivot towards services, away from selling as many boxes, as much gear as we can. Economists have great, I think, snarky little titles for things. The misery index is one. Inflation plus unemployment, two things that are supposed to be sort of reciprocal, or hopefully are reciprocal. When you add them together, that is the misery index. So I think one night in a nightmare, I just had a vision for the business model misery index, which is scalability and flexibility. You would think if you are a very scalable business, that's okay, you know, maybe we're not so flexible, but we're particular with what we're doing, so we can make a lot of things or have a great output, you know, on a very narrow product or skill set, and that can be efficient. Or the opposite, you know, maybe we're not scalable, but we can do anything you ask. Offensive security is a miserable business because it is not scalable and not flexible at all. So going into that, our way of being profitable before Cisco and after they bought us a little bit was this thing called the playbook. We had a lot of industry vets on our team, considering how small a startup we were. And it was a big advantage to us going in. The playbook, think of like Hammurabi's code for like a profitable pen testing business. It was a methodology, a manifesto, and a book of laws, kind of all at the same time. And it's easy to look at that and say like, well, it's no fun to work for you. Like, that doesn't sound like a very fun environment. But one of the biggest things I think that dragged our pen testers down was having to make a lot of judgment calls between where to follow process and where to jump down a rabbit hole. And having what I would call Hammurabi's code, the bare set of rules we needed to operate together was really empowering. It allowed people to do their jobs, to know where their responsibility started and ended, and it served us really well. And we took it kind of as far as we could in Cisco into kind of an odd shadow P&L phase where everyone in Cisco would come poke us and say, you know, what are you guys doing? We'd explain to them. They'd look at us like we were crazy and they'd leave us alone, and it was great. It lasted about a year and a half, and then it started to change when regime changes over the service org started to happen really frequently. I think in like 3.5 or 4 years, we had 3 different senior leadership changes. And when that happens, the context of those little regimes is, because they know they're getting swapped out in a year and a half if they don't perform or they don't put the numbers up, they start incentivizing quick fixes. They want to see pull through, which is, you know, from our team, the reports we write, which are vendor agnostic and showing vulnerabilities and findings. How much hardware sales does that lead to? How much additional, you know, recurring revenue subscription service sales does that lead to? And just getting exceptionally tactical and short-term minded about it. So what that made it really difficult for us to do was grow the business, because if you constantly have over-rotating, short-term financially motivated leaders, they're not going to approve big outlays for recs, particularly for something like offensive security, where if we hire someone who's 80% of the way there or 75% of the way there towards being billable and just jumping in on our team and fully contributing, that's a boon, that's rare. It's really hard for us to get those recs approved. So it really stifled us. Painfully and ironically, and I guess predictably, the way that growth and maturation happened over all those years was learning a lot of hard lessons and making a lot of stupid mistakes. We started offering services on a subscription basis, security, pen testing, and more traditional things that you see from Cisco: network maintenance, data center maintenance, collaboration with WebEx, all that stuff. But deals weren't getting scoped properly because the sales team, the Venezuelans, were used to volume. Let's move. You know, let's turn over this quarter, next quarter, this fiscal year. And it set delivery up for failure, both with a lack of clear statements of work and a lack of back-end tools and structure. Because just because you say, all right, well, Cisco is no longer a hardware company, we're a as-a-service software or service provider company, doesn't make it so. I mean, we still had a team of people who were used to racking and stacking and selling boxes. So add all that up, and it was a tricky time. I think where we ultimately landed was it was a result of setting more reasonable short-term goals and allowing the business units to focus on delivering sustainable processes and norms instead of short-term results. I mean, this is a kind of a cliche and a euphemism of a slide. But we are now, under our current regime, I think 3.5, 4 years in, and in the third iteration of kind of our service offerings called business critical services, whatever. But it took courage from our leadership team to say, we're gonna ignore results for a while and look at the process to get here. Because we were stuck in that same loop 3 exact times before this. So a little bit of a pivot. Fun customer stories are great. I wish I could really get into the details of some of the people. One I wanted to pick is actually probably my biggest customer post-acquisition. It's a auto manufacturer, OEM, one of the big ones you've heard of in Michigan. They came to us initially through the account team, but it was perfect timing because Cisco was pushing our group towards IoT. They had healthcare in mind, they had industry, manufacturing in mind. So we had the chops to look at automotive hardware. The first app, the first project we had was an app. It was one of the kind of ancillary cell phone apps where you can manage your car, your account with the company, this, that, and the other. It went really well. It turned into more work. The in-vehicle testing, when they realized, oh, you guys have hardware chops, and that was pretty rare. We had a lab in Chicago, so the logistics worked out. That was really cool. And then in 2015, if you guys remember, the G-Pack, that just changed everything because then everyone and their mother freaked out about automotive security. How practical was that? We can argue. In my opinion, not very practical. But it really changed our role with this particular customer to becoming a seat at the table for designing new features, for being part of the creative process, and it was a lot of fun. Internally, it made my job super fun because everybody at our company wanted to be on that team, wanted to be on that program. So it was almost like, all right, well, if you do great work on, particularly to the newer consultants, if you do great work on your projects, maybe you can earn a spot on so-and-so's program because this is where everyone wanted to be. It's a lot of fun. Got a weird ask from same customer, from the marketing and security teams to kind of collaborate with them both on pretty neat project that connected data centers in Michigan to the cars. And in particular, what I think got lost in like the G-Pack in 2015 was that the crown jewels for the auto manufacturers was not your safety. Yeah, it was important, but they knew that the odds of that getting on the front page of the newspaper is pretty low. The real crown jewels were the engineering data that every car with a modem in it sends back that you don't know about in the background that helps them make better cars next time. I think it's like 2004, 2005, pretty much every car has either a 3G cell modem on it or some now even have LTE modems on them to report that data back. It's obfuscated, it's safe, but they wanted us to do an end-to-end test from the car all the way back to their data center. And we were licking our lips. We thought it was a lot of fun. We were in Michigan to talk about it. And then IT walks in and they almost like threw their gloves down and had a fight with their colleagues, with the marketing and security people because they knew that they weren't ready for it, that it was going to be a bloody report. And they got canned. They won. They stifled us. So the money got rolled over into a separate project where we built them a roadmap and a business plan, basically, for them to ramp up their own offensive security team in 2 to 3 years. You ask me, that was the most valuable dollar for dollar spend I ever saw a customer make. The work that consultant did to build them a plan, and he's now a security director at Netflix. It was really an amazing piece of work. Obviously, they failed and achieved nothing in the plan over the next 2 and 3 years. And what happened was we just became entrenched as the thinkers and the doers around, whatever modest effort they could muster to actually build their own team. So the big data center project connecting to the cars happens again. I don't know how, but somehow they decided that it was going to go forward. Our plan of attack, we were going to do a network security architecture assessment, which is like an academic assessment. A lot of interviews, a lot of looking at the organization, looking at processes and stuff. No pen testing, no touching anything. Making basic findings and recommendations on that. And then follow that with a pen test to really see where they're at. I think we did a segmentation strategy project after that as well, but that's risk and boring stuff. It was the bloodiest report I've ever seen. Over the course of 6 to 8 weeks, we had control of HVAC in all the manufacturing facilities on the continent. We were taking pictures of executives at their desk. We had one of a nose picker that we didn't get them all the way up there, but we got them like here. It was pretty clear. And And we took a different tact with how we reported it too, because instead of just having it be a gruesome report with 3 pages of red findings, like single spaced, we tried to roll it up more and deliberately present it in a way that you couldn't sit in that conference room and point a finger at someone else in a different department and not know that you were talking about a systemic issue that you were all to blame for. So instead of it being a knockdown, drag-out fight amongst, chubby middle-aged men with mustaches and sweater vests, which is what we thought we were going to get, it was like a funeral, that readout. It was quiet and it was awkward. But what I think we gleaned from that experience and what has translated into what we still do today with security, with offensive security, with just general, strategic projects around our technology, is we try to connect everything from the top down. And it's largely a mindset shift. I mean, it's easy to, again, kind of a kitschy slide like this, but shifting from selling as many boxes of things and as many butts in seats per hour as possible to selling business outcomes does start with a change of mindset. And that's been a big part of what has happened over the last, I don't know what, like three and a half years now, that I think has led to us being a much more mature service delivery organization. Now, it's completely unrealistic and a dream to get top level access to executives and decision makers for every project, particularly when you're dealing with Fortune 50, Fortune 100 customers. You get stuck in the middle. So I don't want to, I know this is a lot easier said than done, but I think part of the reason that those top level conversations, and sometimes even the mid level, conversations with kind of middle managers or directors don't happen, is because it's not always easy to have a let's think big thoughts conversation in an organized and productive way with executive stakeholders. The different styles, different objectives, I mean, you name it. So again, this is a very high level management consulting framework that we can drill down into more, or I can give more readings on if you're really interested. But it's kind of applying a commercial consulting approach to those conversations and knowing in the back of your head going in, 99% chance this is not a technology problem. 99% chance this is a human problem. This is a labor problem. This is an organizational problem. This is a strategic problem. When you're having those top level conversations about business objectives. So when, even at a high level, I mean, you're asking questions about what the environment looks like, what your capabilities look like, and how we can combine those to create a good plan, to make a strategic fit. And this can be very complicated. It can be very simple. On the environment side, when you approach a conversation as a technology problem, you don't often ask, what are the external shocks and mandates you're dealing with? How can you shape your environment to it being an advantage versus a liability? What does a sustainable competitive advantage mean? Now, again, lots of times, if you're going to get into an industry and competitor analysis conversation, that's a deep one. I love it when we get to at Cisco, but we're not McKinsey, we're not Bain, we're not Accenture, we don't always get to. But when you can ask these types of questions, and whether it's over the course of a morning or a workshop over a couple of days, and follow that with, what are we good at? What are we really bad at? What can we leverage that we really don't want to let go? What decisions have we made? What paths have we decided that we're going to go down last year that we're stuck on that is a sunk cost and we don't need to be arguing with ourselves about? And I think the trickiest is how can the customer organize itself to ensure that we're not thinking about this today or this month or this quarter, but it's built in to the way we think all the time. Obviously, this can get really complicated, but a super simple example of a time that we took, that consulting framework and just rolled it into a project I was voluntold to do. This is like 2 or 3 years ago, when we were really, focusing on process and, just needed to change our mindset and build that into our system. So, an internal kickoff call after a project is sold, all the paper, I's are dotted, T's are crossed, it's happening, legal's done, it's a deal, it's booked. We had a tendency to just assign a team and get going. Well, what happened was 90 days later or 6 months later, our customers would call the account team and say, we're not getting any value out of this. We're still ramping up. What are you guys doing? So the problem was having our teams hit the ground running on day one because they were positioned in a way to succeed. So I'm sure, if you look, this is a customer kickoff. This is an internal call. This is after a team is assigned, after the deal is booked, before any customer gets called, reached out to by a project manager or a principal. It's, are our ducks lined up? Are our minds in the right place? Are we all looking at the same thing? And if we can't get through all these steps, we're not. So again, it's a meeting agenda. It's simple, but simple can work very well. So, got a lot of time. Hope you guys have questions. Key takeaways: focus on the process. The quick results in this space, it's a nightmare, and it's going to drive everybody crazy, and it's not sustainable. Also because everything's changing all the time. When you're working with customers, connect as much as you can. Very, very rarely are technical problems not supremely rooted in people, organizational, or strategic issues. And last, get creative and use external or sometimes not particularly intuitive means to find a strategic fit. If you asked me when I was in business school in 2006 if I'd be using a consulting framework from a class that was driving me crazy, largely to build processes for offensive security, I'd have told you were nuts. But that was what happened. Applying a strategic framework to our playbook that Cisco, didn't make too possible to use all the time, turned into a blueprint for, not just that meeting, but really how I built out our whole engagement process. So that's my shtick. Any thoughts, questions, ways you guys have experienced these types of issues?
Exact same scenario in my career, but I didn't see in your presentation, how did you get the customer when they came back to you and said, hey, we're not seeing an ROI, we're still ramping up 6 months later? How did you turn that around? Or did you say, well, that's what you bought into up front? How did you, you can't keep throwing mud at them and telling them this is the you've been doing it wrong all this time. You hired us to do it right. Now get on board with doing it right.
So two things happened. One, some really good executives in our leadership realized that the approach that you're outlining was wrong, and it was our fault. And they made it a lot easier for us to go back to that same customer and have a mea culpa moment. We have, this was largely our fault. We have redesigned our approach. Here's how we're going to address this next time. And the service offerings changed to make it a lot easier to have those delivery teams succeed quickly versus take 90 days or 6 months, whatever, to figure out, is this going to work or is the customer going to hate us? The second thing they did, which I think actually was more important, was they aligned the economic incentives of all the players. From sales down through delivery managers, instead of, I get my quota for this, I move on, it was spread much thinner over lots of different roles over a longer period of time. So the lesson learned in generation one was that's not going to happen by itself. I think leadership assumed when we first started with subscription services, that everyone was going to see, oh, here's the obvious way we're going to work together. But it didn't happen. What happened was everyone said, how am I going to get the biggest commission check that I can? And you can say that's dumb or greedy, fine, but it's rational. And that was, in my opinion, the most important thing that changed. That really got everyone's mind in the right place, was to start from the back end with the individual contributor and make sure that they were incentivized to cooperate and win together. Does that make sense?
On the Cisco side, it does, but I'm still missing the piece on.
How do we talk to customers about it?
Yeah, how did the customer do it? Did you force or encourage a mere couple moment for the customer to say, yeah, we need to?
That's a great point. Sometimes.
Doing it the right way, and how did you get buy-in from the CEO all the way down from a Fortune 50 or 100 company?
So on our end, you're right. Lots of knee pads and promotions. On the customer side, though, so you're really right. Something I left out was changing their mindset. Is almost equally as important, because if they're used to buying something from you, paying you to set it up, tune it, and hand it to them working, they're not coming in with a mindset of, we are going to get out of this what we put in. Now, we're not, if we're doing a pen test for a customer, we don't need them to sit side by side with us and show us what to do. But we do need to really understand why they're doing it, where everything is. We need their time to set, set boxes up, get the environment right, get all the paperwork done. So when customers know that they have skin in the game in terms of the quality of the results, you get a much better result. But that, again, is a much easier conversation to talk about than it is to have, because they're not used to dealing with salespeople or a company, that is invested in their outcomes. They're used to a transactional relationship.
So there's two buckets of money happening. There's the cost that Cisco is saying it's going to cost you X, and if you position it correctly, and you have to also tell them if they don't already get it, I'm also going to have to contribute X or 2X in order for this to work, because I can't just spend the money and have you do all the work. I have to be invested. My team has to give time, resources, salaries, that whole thing. So did you shift the way you sold to say, this is the cost for us, this is your cost, and we've already done the analysis for you?
Exactly. So what I want to find out of this conversation with the customer is where are your bedrocks that your organization is built on, whether it's the heroics of one person or some system or some intellectual property, and where are the cracks that are going to be disproportionately painful for you against your peers or other industry or other customers, whatever, that are going to be disproportionately painful for you to fill. And most of the time that's labor, it's people. And if we're talking about a network engineer, I mean, it's not a mystery what their going rates are. So if, ACI and automation, I mean, it's not security, but it's a particularly thorny skill set for our customers to manage and keep on hand. Because usually they're needed it's really specialized, but they're needed for short stints every time there's an upgrade or a new technology added. So that's something that makes a tremendous amount of sense for them to leverage from us in a very small amount when they need it without having to do a new deal. So if point out, for example, how much is it going to cost for you to hire that engineer? Well, how long is it going to take to get them? How much is it going to cost for you to get them? Then once you have them, how much is it going to cost per year to keep them for 2 or 3 years? Because you can't fire them after 6 months, because then your whole team's going to quit. So if you need, 6 weeks of a really talented person, for 6 weeks full time, and then maybe, 5-10 hours a week for the next 6 months to kind of transition to a more steady state run and maintain with the customer, that's a very, very easy ROI for me to present to the customer.
Is that what you meant by scope split?
Yeah, exactly. It's what are you responsible for as a customer? What am I responsible for as a service provider?
Right.
And
so you're a customer ongoing expense within your HR, and then what are we going to bring and ramp
Right.
up and then scale back, ramp up and scale back
Yeah.
as needed moving forward. So let's create a long-term relationship. So this is going to get us. I mean, are you trying to sell Cisco services? So hey, if I build you guys up the way we've scoped it, you won't need us anymore because your internal team will be able to take care of it after we've.
Sometimes. I would simplify it and take it a step back from that and say, if this conversation, I have this conversation well and the right way, if it yields the most efficient scope split possible for that particular customer. Cisco, another one of the mistakes of the first generation of our subscription services was assuming that one size fitted all, or even that one size fitted most. I think it was a mix of, it was a little bit naive, it was a little lazy, and it was just how you would expect a 75,000 person company who's new to services to take it on. But that's why, there's a lot of different approaches you can take. This is one of them that, gives you the information you need to go into that meeting with a customer saying, hey, this is not a stock offering. This is kind of a stock foundation that we have custom built for you out of what we know about what you can leverage, what you can still get the most out of. And we can plug in those pain points at a relatively low cost because here's your alternative.
I don't know if I'm on here. I think I'm on. All right. Thank you, Reed. Thank you for doing this. That's very enlightening. I think this feathers in a little bit. You had a slide there where you talked about your internal process before the kickup and building up to the kickup. I'm just curious about how do you, or can you talk to, what is your access to information and to the, or how do you approach that? And a lot of the stakeholders you're working with on the client side are going to be the people who are probably not enthusiastic about this project. How do you do a good job of that process so that you can nail down these scope splits and have an effective plan from the start so we don't get off into the weeds where we've been?
Yeah, no, good question. Lots of times we have a running start because we're not new to their environment, to their organization. One really nice thing about Cisco is it's a great culture. They really put their money where their mouth is to make people, put people in a position to do what they think is the best work they can do. And an outcome of that is we don't have a lot of churn. So a lot of our engineers have spent a lot of years getting used to and building relationship with customers on site. Now it's in a different capacity. It's in more of a transactional, I buy, you set up, you build, you fix, but they still know where the bodies are buried. They still know who the players are. They still know who makes the big decisions and where the liabilities are. So if discovery in this sense, it's hard, but it's infinitely easier if you go in with, I've thoroughly thought about this. I've taken what we know about your environment, which is generally a lot. And I'm starting not from scratch, but from maybe, 35, 40% down the road. It makes it a lot easier.
Excellent. Thank you.
And the continuity on the back end too, that's a really big selling point. To not have to constantly have, the lowest bidder turning over every year. I worked for CSC in Washington, D.C. before they were kind of broken up and sold. And that was our plan, and it was miserable. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, guys. Have a great weekend.